Check 1 2 1 2 1 2. Check. Jiggy 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 jiggy. What?
And now, the Justice Work Group and the Beyond the Bars Fellows are proud to present.
I think we're ready. Are y'all ready?
For the first annual West Coast Beyond the Bars.
Oh, no. Hell no. That's not how we starting this off. Are y'all ready? That's more like it. Give yourselves a big round of applause for being at the inaugural Beyond the Bars LA Conference. Yes. My name is Bree. I am the faculty advisor for the Justice Work Group. Give it up, stand up if you're part of the Justice Work Group in this room right now, who's organized with the Beyond the Bars Fellows, the Beyond the Bars LA Conference. Give it up. Can we do a little better than that? Can we give it up for them? They worked so hard to be here today, to make this happen for you today. Excellent. Please come in, folks, come in and have a seat. I am blessed to be here 3,000 miles away from home in Brooklyn, New York. But I've come this way to work with y'all to build my family, mi familia, toda mi gente aquí. All right, we're gonna build, we got work to do. And so it's a blessing to be here with you. I think because I have the experience of spending a short amount of time behind bars, I may be the only formerly incarcerated migrant worker on the faculty here at UCLA. Very proud to say that. Very proud to say that. And I've been asked to highlight a couple of things about this conference. This conference, which folks have worked so hard over the last year to pull together, the folks in the black t-shirts, and some of y'all will leave with some of them, is about bringing together community, campus, corrections to end mass incarceration. Make no mistake about it, we see ourselves as being connected to a long struggle of abolition, a long struggle of ending systems that are not broken. I don't believe these systems are broken, so I want to start off by setting the right tone. I don't believe the systems that are in place that are creating mass incarceration are broken. They are doing exactly what they were designed to do. And so we are here today making no mistake about it that we are not broken people. And these are not broken systems. These are systems that were designed with the legacy of genocide and slavery, of taking native land away, enslaving people, and forcing folks into systems of inequity and injustice. And so we are here to figure out together what is our vision of creating the world that we want to live in, and how do we end mass incarceration as a part of continuing that long legacy of struggle that we have inherited. Are y'all with me? Are y'all with me? Okay, so I see a lot of my brothers and sisters here who've been doing this work. I'm going to get out of your face in just a second, but I want to just recognize also, as an artist, we have been very intentional about bringing the arts and culture into the mix with our activists and our advocates and our academics that are in the mix as well this weekend. You don't want to miss a minute of this. So we have The Box piece on solitary confinement being performed tomorrow night. Give it up for all the folks involved with pulling that together. It's a very important piece. We also have a production called What It Is, which was adapted by women at California Institute for Women, the oldest prison for women in the state of California. A piece adapted by them and developed by mostly formerly incarcerated folks on the East Coast. That will be performed tonight after this and tomorrow night. So I'm going to give you a little taste of that in just a moment. But I also want to recognize our folks from Columbia University Center for Justice. Will you please stand? Those who have come here, who started Beyond the Bars 7 years ago with Angela Davis and Kathy Boudin. We got my man Cameron and Cheryl. We have folks, with so many folks to name, but I do want to acknowledge that the Columbia University Center for Justice has been working with us to develop this, because we realize this is a strong movement in LA, it's a strong movement in New York, it's a strong movement nationwide, and we can only be effective if we are sharing best practices and strategies to figure out what we're doing locally, what can be done nationally, to actually be involved with our allies and comrades and soldiers who are doing this work across the country. So that's an important piece of this conversation. I want to make sure we recognize 31 UCLA students and staff and alumni with the Community Programs Office went to New York last March for the Beyond the Bars Conference. We would like to invite you all to come with us to New York for the Beyond the Bars Conference next March, which happens the first weekend in March. We've had Angela Davis there for 3 or 4 of those. We have some amazing folks with us here today who you're going to hear the lineup in just a moment if you haven't already read it. But before I get off the stage, I'm going to bring up one of the writers, a brother who is an amazing poet who's going to share a little piece of what you're going to see if you come to what it is after this tonight. He's going to bless us, and then you'll get a little bit of the last poets as the opener for the show this evening as well. But before I bring Jason up, Jason Dorsey spent some time in Connecticut prisons, and I have to say this. When he was born, his father was incarcerated. When his first son was born, he was incarcerated. And at a certain point, he realized that he was incarcerated with his own father in prison in Connecticut. And so the way that the intergenerational impact of mass incarceration is affecting us is happening from coast to coast and should be ever present in our conversations, in our discussions, and in our strategy and work sessions that happen through Sunday as we figure out how to not just talk about these ideas, but to actually engage in the work that is necessary to actually put these ideas into place, to have the vision for not just how we end mass incarceration, but for what we replace it with. What is the society, the system we want to actually put in its place? How do we deal with the capitalism and genocide and slavery and homophobia and racism and all of the systems of oppression that are built into it? How do we actually build that better world? So Jason is going to share a short piece from what it is that he wrote even before that production was put in place. Before he comes up, I got to make sure he feels welcome. He just flew 3,000 miles from Connecticut yesterday, so I want to make sure he feels welcome. So here's how we gonna bring him up. So when I say rise up, my people, I need somebody to say rise up, rise up. Can y'all do that for me? Rise up, my people. Rise up. That was like the remedial class or something. That was not top notch. That was not like you meant it. You know what I'm saying? I was like, you just discovered movement work yesterday. No, we doing this for real. All right? And we're at this institution built by black and brown and working folks, not imagining that we would be occupying these spaces to take them over and to put forward our own agenda. But here we are. Here we are saying we are standing on native land, and we're taking it back, and we're coming into the prisons to take our children back, to take our mothers and our fathers back, our uncles and our aunties back. So if you're with me on that, when I say rise up, my people, I need you to hear you. Rise up, my people. Rise up, black people. Rise up, Latin people. Rise up, working people. Rise up, trans folks. Rise up, all my sisters. Rise up, everybody. Give yourselves a big round of applause and give it up for Jason Dorsey.
My life is a gift inside this box. Inside another box. I live in a box inside another box, and they gift wrap it in gold, silvers, and reds. And see, my kids always tear the gift wrap to shreds because beauty don't have no flesh. It's just beautiful. But in my box, my sink is my toilet where I wash my socks. In my box, freedom is a dream of my mama's home cooking and all the things that I missed. See, last night, I dreamt I felt her tender kiss. See, I dreamt I was home, but I woke in this cell. Is there any way out of this monotonous hell? Because I hear screams and chains and slamming jail bars. No sight of the stars. I'm harassed by the guards, so I masturbate to ease the pain. And I medicate to reality escape, special parole stipulations, manipulation, probation, globalization by big corporations where inmates make Michael Kors handbags instead of breaking rocks. But you can't put that on your job application when you check the felon box. So coming home felt just like Selma during segregation and slavery's emancipation. We came home with no education, with no destination, no destiny in this nation, hence the creation of the first privatized plantation and the vagrancy laws. See, with no incomes, no home, slaves became vagabonds. and vagrants were less than arrested and sentenced to a private-owned, government-funded facility where the owner ate the fruits of their labor in tranquility, and the slave's hostility was always fearfully locked in, boxed in, picking cotton. In Osborne, CCI, Summers, Connecticut, inmates make hats, T-shirts, and mattresses of cotton for 3 hots and a cot. And have we forgotten that slavery was a crime? But now it's used as a punishment for other crimes. And you say, well, that's a crime inside another crime. Just call it blackmail. And if it's a crime to be a black male, then we've all been blackmailed, hoodwinked, bamboozled, blackmail. What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they're cutting for you and money turns to plastic and you can no longer sling rocks? Can't sing, bling, bling, play ball, dance, or box. And how you gonna box your way out when you all boxed in, locked in a box, doing time? The real box is in your mind. See, I'm back in the box. I'm black in the box. Parole violation got me like a jack in the box. Smoking crack in the box. U.S. rap in the box. Put a stamp on the box. Priority black male to a majority black jail. As a minority black male, the Dow Jones just had an all black sale in my life. My life has become a stock. See, my life is a gift. Inside this box, inside another box, inside another box. So I opened it and saw everything they never wanted me to see, and the universe became my university. Peace, y'all. Thank you.
Testing. I'm Lamont Jackson. Welcome to UCLA and the inaugural Beyond the Bars Fellow Conference. This is my, is there a word? My fellow. This is Gabby.
Hi, my name is Gabby. We welcome you on behalf of the Fellows and Justice Work Group of UCLA to the Beyond the Bars LA. We want to take a moment to acknowledge throughout this conference that UCLA is built on the land of the Tongva people.
And just to echo what Breon said earlier, we understand that UCLA has historically and continues to be a space of deep oppression, and we want to take this weekend as a way of leveraging the resources that we have here and building community in order to truly end mass incarceration.
I don't know how to follow that. I'm Anthony, Beyond the Bars Fellow. I just want to set the intention for the rest of the weekend is that this weekend's about abolition of us, and abolition can mean different things to different people, but I think we all agree that abolition, we want to abolish this present system of mass incarceration and criminal injustice system that disproportionately affects black and brown folks, also, but it affects everybody. And when we come in your communities with no rehab, no education, no nothing, it affects all of us and it hurts all of us in the end. And we have to understand that we're all in this together as one big family. And the times we're in right now is very divided and very volatile. And so what we need to do is have a cultural revolution, the way we look at each other as human beings. Yeah, we need to change practices, policies, procedures, but before we can do that, we need to change how we treat each other and how we look at each other. So I think that's what this movement from the East Coast to the West Coast, that's what we're trying to do, and hopefully we make it out of this year. Oh, say your name.
My name is Kevin. Thank you all for coming. I just want to ask everybody to remember our brothers and our sisters who are still behind bars. And for those who are behind bars and may catch word of this, do not forget that you are not helpless behind those bars. There is much being done from behind the bars as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Wendy Staggs, and my goal is to have all of you have new eyes. I want you to see the blood and the veins that flow through everybody, but I do not want you to see the skin. I don't want you to see the person on the outside. I want you to know the person on the inside. And that's why we're here today. 1 out of 4 people know somebody that's been incarcerated. 2 out of 4 people have had somebody incarcerated in their life or have been incarcerated themselves. Those are pretty high odds, especially that we have a box that you have to check stating, yeah, I'm a felon. That puts our employment rate at a lower rate because we can't employ people who have been incarcerated. So that affects our employment, it affects our people, it affects us as a culture and a community. And today we are all coming together to rise up and to become one community. We no longer have to have division between any of us. And we hope that you have a beautiful and a very engaging conference with us. And we're all glad that you came. Thank you very much.
So with that being said, this is our kickoff discussion this evening. We have a great panel, a great panel of panelists, experts in the field, with the exception, I believe, with Dr. Melina Abdullah. Well, I'll take that back. There she is right there. Well, she gets in trouble every now and then, but she gets out of jail right away. But everybody else has been directly impacted by the criminal justice system. I'm looking forward to this. It's being moderated by Dr. Ophelia Cuevas. Did I say it right? All right. Thank you for agreeing to participate at such short notice. It's my hope and the hope of my fellow fellows and the Justice Work Group that this conversation that we're going to have tonight is going to kick off the theme of the conference, which is the ending of mass incarceration. But I'm glad that everybody was able to accept our offer and invitation to participate on this panel. My good friend and colleague from way back in the day, the real Freeway Ricky Ross, he's going to really give it to you raw. I mean, everybody knows Ricky's story. Shaka Senghor, Danny Murillo. I'm just looking forward to this conversation. Kim Carter, I know Kim's somewhere right here. She earned her pardon. Where you at, Kim? Okay, so I'm just looking forward to this conversation. And again, I'm asking that this conversation, just give it to them raw, unadulterated, pure, you know. I'm looking forward to this. So that being said, let's enjoy this conference, all right? Thank you.
Good evening. I am your favorite bald and bearded host to promote and announce in a more lengthy fashion the amazing panelists that we have this evening. I'm Colin Cab Washington. I formerly worked here at UCLA in residential life for 3 years. Helped start the conversation for finding this space. They finished the conversation. So give a big shout out first and foremost to all the people and all the hands that went into making this thing happen. The UCLA Justice Work Group, our amazing fellows, the faculty and staff, our esteemed colleagues and guests, so definitely. First coming to the stage, our first panelist, Rick Ross, the original. He is self-proclaimed as unafraid, stubborn. He went from selling drugs to spending 20 years in prison to beating his case and becoming a best-selling author. Give it up for Mr. Rick Ross. Next up, we have Kim Carter. Kim Carter's journey began right here in San Bernardino Valley College, where she earned her certificate in accounting with an emphasis on governmental funding. Currently, she is the president and CEO of the of the Time for Change. Awesome, say it loud. Ms. Carter's scholarly work includes being the author of Invisible Bars, Barriers to Women's Health and Well-Being, and the creator of The Disease of Incarceration, an epidemiological model of interventions for women in prison. Give it up for Kim Carter. Next up, we have Shaka Senghor. Shaka Senghor is a New York Times bestseller for his memoir, Righting My Wrongs. He is the president and creative director of Mind Blown Media and is the consulting producer for Released, which is currently airing this fall on the OWN network. Give it up for Shaka Senghor. Next up, we have a very distinguished and esteemed professor. She's the professor and chair of the Pan-African Studies Department at California State Los Angeles. She's the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, and she is a mama. Ladies and gentlemen, give a round of applause for Dr. Melina Abdullah. All right. Next up, we have a 2016 Soros Justice Advocacy Fellow at the Opportunity Institute. Working in the Opportunity and Justice team, Danny will work to empower formerly incarcerated students by creating a network of students throughout California who have successfully made the transition from incarceration to higher education. He graduated from UC Berkeley in 2015 with a degree in ethnic studies and was a Ronald E. McNair Scholar conducting research on the disproportionate rate of suspension of black male students in Oakland's public schools. Also while at Berkeley, he co-founded the Underground Scholars Initiative, an organization dedicated to supporting students who have been personally impacted by incarceration. He has received numerous awards in recognition of his leadership and service to the university community. Give it up for Danny Morillo. And last but not least, presenting your amazing panel moderator this evening, we have Dr. Ofelia Ortiz Cuevas, who is an interdisciplinary scholar in the Department of Chicano Studies at UC Davis. She has been working on issues of race, prisons, and policing for over 20 years. Cuevas works on the histories of race, policing, and imprisonment as an abolitionist, and has worked with organizations such as Critical Resistance, as well as community organizations in California. She's at work on her second book, Policing LA's Human Terrain, The Criminal Non-Human at Point Zero, which examines Los Angeles County Jail as a critical point on the city's cartography of productive human terrain. Give it up for Dr. Ofelia Ortiz Cuevas.
Can I stand up here? Yeah, do. Yeah. All right, but then I can sit down sometimes too, right? Sure. Yeah. All right. Hello. Can you hear me? Oh yeah. Is this working? Yeah. Is that working? Hello? Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Right on. Okay. I am really very honored to be here with this group of folks. I'm a little nervous. I don't usually get nervous, but I hope. I just don't want to let anybody on this panel down. I'm really in awe of everyone's work here. It is really kind of incredible that all these folks are here together. And I was asked to be moderator, so I am going to start asking folks questions, and maybe even to get to the first question that we talked about when we were sitting in the back room together, I could tell you a tiny bit about how and why I do this work. First, as an abolitionist, it seems like everyone is kind of pretty familiar with the idea of prison abolition at this point, right? Can I get a hand raise, like who's, okay. Good, I was just on a panel a couple, like last week, and somebody I think really misunderstood what I meant by prison abolition, and I just want to kind of clear that up, at least from my point of view, and then maybe we can start asking questions, is, for me, abolition is really about like the dismantlement not only of prisons but the whole kind of construct of racial capitalism. To me, it is constantly a move, it's a plot, it's an agenda to change, where the arc of change is always towards freedom, right? Freedom as a whole, freedom from indebtedness, freedom from prisons, freedom from the precarity of access to food, freedom from the precarity of access to money in your pocket, freedom from hunger, freedom from, pain and harm. It really is a holistic kind of move, the idea of abolition. And I think that it's important, and I guess it's why we're all here, to kind of look at the role, and I think a very central role that the prison, as well as policing, I mean, we haven't talked about police very much, but I think it may come up in this conversation, because I think policing, is actually as central to the problem with mass incarceration as mass incarceration itself. I think it would be difficult to not talk about those two. And so I think with that said, I'm going to ask the first question to the panel, and you guys can, whoever wants to hit this one first, they can. What do you guys think about the idea of prison abolition or abolition versus the idea of reform and reforming systems, the already existing systems of policing, of prisons, or maybe capitalism in general, right? Is there a difference for you all? Is it how do you see making those particular kinds of change we're all looking for in the shape of either abolition or reform? Yeah, Melinda.
So I appreciate that frame. I appreciate everyone who's here. I want to make a slight correction in my introduction. I am not a co-founder of Black Lives Matter. I'm an original member. I was at the first meeting, but I didn't call that meeting. So just to be clear, when we talk about incarceration and criminalization, and I think it's important that we entangle the two, that we understand that the system of mass criminalization and mass incarceration feed each other, right? And so we can't simply talk about folks being incarcerated without talking about how they were criminalized in the first place, right? So the abolition of both systems becomes necessary. I think that a lot of the rhetoric now, one of the things that we've I think been pretty successful at doing over the last 4 or 5 years is really advancing kind of a call to action around these systems. However, I think as the system, and I think Breon said this, right? These systems are created to produce the outcomes that they do. And I think Manning Marable really talks about that in his book, How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America, right? That the systems that we live under aren't accidental. It's not accidental that in LA County, black folks are 8% of the population, but upwards of 30% of the jail population, right? That's not accidental. They've created these systems to produce these outcomes. And so the rhetoric has been shifted by those who are invested in that system. So what I'm saying is that when we think about questions of reform, that's not the position that we ever came at it with. Right? We know that not just mass incarceration and mass criminalization are wrong, but criminalization and incarceration are wrong, right? And so we need to begin to reimagine what it means to live in a safe community, what peace looks like. How do we get to peace? By demanding justice. And so I think that when we talk about reform, what you're talking about is tinkering around the edges of a system that's built on our backs. We can't do that. We have to say, what does safety look like? What does peace look like? What kind of world do we want to live in, and work on building that? And so that's an abolitionist frame. It means holistically looking at the world as it is and saying, you know, what kind of world would we prefer?
Hey, how y'all doing? Y'all like y'all asleep up in this joint?
Right.
Got all deep. Actually, that's a pretty interesting question. I personally don't think it has to be an either or situation. It's one of the reasons I struggle actually working in these spaces a lot of times. Having come from being incarcerated for 19 years, 7 of that in solitary confinement, I often think about, who do I do this work for? I grew up 2 decades with men who are currently dying in prison, who are still in prison, and I got out with the intention and purpose of ensuring that I can do everything in my power to bring these men back home to their families. And I say men because I was actually locked up with men. It's not to, exclude the women, but that was my motivation. So oftentimes I find myself in these spaces where we have these ideological debates or arguments. How do we have to frame something? But then I get on the phone and I hear a friend say, I'm actually having a hearing because y'all got the juvenile lifer bill passed. That happens to come up under the frame of the reform. I hear friends who say that I'm benefiting from the rolling back of the 3 strikes law and I can actually come home to my family now. So personally, I don't think that it has to be an either or type of situation. And I think the danger in that is that oftentimes the people who are articulating what these things aren't actually in the trenches. And they don't have a real lived experience. And so they don't know what it's like to go home to a family, to a mother who said, just bring my baby home. Just bring them back to my family. And that's the danger of working in these spaces. And so, what I love about this particular panel is that there was the audacity to bring people who were directly impacted by the reality of incarceration. I've been out for 7 years and I've watched people speak for us, but that haven't lived in my shoes and probably couldn't do a day in my shoes. And real talk, right? And so I think that we have enough articulate men and women who come out of that environment who can speak to what do we really need to do in order to bring our friends and loved ones home. And I think it's really important that we do have the high overarching idea of how do you abolish a system. I think that's very important. But it can't come at the expense of saying we don't change these things in real time while they're really happening, because at that point, it just leaves us in this space where we're just having a bunch of ideological, intellectual masturbation taking places over these microphones. And so, we have to be realistic about what's happening.
I'd like to add on to that too, because when I was in prison, one of the things that I said that I wanted to do is I wanted to show that I could do something different. I wanted to rule out the stereotype that I had been stereotyped all my life, that I was a drug dealer, that I was a thug, that I couldn't do anything. And while I was in prison, I was privileged enough to see other people that were in prison who were better than themselves, and I took on that same slate because I felt that if I could show that I was able to better myself, then it would give people the courage that other guys that was in prison that had did the same thing that I had done would be treated the same way. So that's why I took it up on myself to better myself and to go out and try to get the things that I felt are not correct about the system corrected.
So when I think about your question about abolish versus reform, I think about over the past 20 years, the state of California built 33 prisons. And I ask myself, where was those abolishers at? Because, see, they built a prison that I wind up having to go live in. And I have yet to see somebody be able to repurpose one of those facilities. So now let's just think, what else could we use all that concrete and all those bars for? Can we, if we come up with an idea of how to reuse that facility for something else, then we know it will no longer exist as the prison. So until that day, we must continue to go work on these bills, the ban the box bills, Reform and Welfare Reform Act, continue to push back on these sentencing guidelines. We got in custody decisions that need to be pushed back on, reentry policies that need to be worked on. We got to continue to do those things while we have those great people with the great idea to abolish it. I'm waiting for the day, but until then, we must continue to do that fight and must continue to make sure that we do not forget about the system of injustice that still exists, the new president and all the rest of them.
So when I think about your question in regards to abolition and reform and what does that mean to me, I see reform, as looking at a wound and putting a Band-Aid on it, and I see abolition as looking at the wound and digging deeper as to what caused it, right? And there's, but you know, and me as a person who believes in prison abolition, not just in prison, not just the idea of prison abolition, but in order to abolish prison, you have to dismantle heteronormative white supremacy and patriarchy, right? So that's really getting to the root of it. Is that going to happen in my lifetime? No, it's not, right? And I'm not being, you know, it might sound pessimistic, but my thing is, while I'm here, what am I going to do to continue the work for maybe 7 generations down the way? What impact did we make while we're here? And what is it that are those that are going to follow us? And what's the kind of society do they live in, right? So now the work that I do, it is reformist, right? I work trying to expand access to college and university credits to people in prison and formerly incarcerated people. Now, like Brother Shaka said, right? Like, you know, I became an abolitionist in solitary confinement. Now, when I came home, you know, I didn't know really what I was going to do, but I knew that I wanted to help people, right? Especially people that were in my situation, right? And so now, in the work that I do, I'm engaged in this reform system by writing letters to the parole board, right? I never thought that I would be in a position where I had the credibility where I could write a letter to the parole board and say, yo, let my brother out because I'm going to help him when he gets out, and I'm going to get him to university, I'm going to get him into college, I'm going to help him create a pathway to be successful. Right? And it's kind of messed up, right? For any of you that know what it is to go to parole board, you literally have to, you know, to a certain way, just humiliate yourself, right? Like you have to tell them, like, I'm a broken person, that it was all my fault. You can't go in there with the mindset of like, yo, there's a set of conditions in my community that created this condition for me to end up in prison. If you go in there with that, like, no, you take your ass back to your cell, denied. Right? So we have to figure out ways how to navigate these systems, right? For abolition, for me, it's not just an ideology, but it's a way of life. And how do I negotiate and how do I navigate my life in this system, right? Where do I put my money at? In a credit union. Not in a private bank, not in Bank of America, Wells Fargo, et cetera, because I know what they do with that money, right? Abolition is also understanding that you can't engage in sexist behavior and that you have to treat people with human dignity, right? That's abolition, right? And treating people with the dignity that they deserve to be treated with. And so it's not just an ideology, but it's also a way of life for me. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
So I just want to say, as the one who spoke first, I shouldn't have grabbed the mic first, because you're right. But it was a little lull, and I wanted to make sure somebody answered the question right. I want to say that as somebody who spoke as an abolitionist and who believes wholeheartedly in abolition, it doesn't mean that we neglect non-reformist reform. So I think you're absolutely right, right? Like doing the reform work, as long as it's non-reformist reform, right, is really important, right? The Panthers used to have a motto, survival pending revolution, right? So we want revolution. But in the meantime, we got to do the things that just bring that mother's child home, right? We have to do that work, and we have to maintain a vision for what is the world we want to live in. And I also want to add just the last thing about this. Who are we who are not formally incarcerated, although Kim challenged me on that, right? Who are we who are not formally incarcerated? Because some of us think about our little stints, right, for, you know, as not really counting. Right.
1 day in jail, you formally incarcerated.
Okay, okay.
To my definition.
Okay, so then we all formally incarcerated, and not just on no protest stuff either, right? But I think that for a lot of us, as mothers, as community members, as folks who have uncles and cousins and brothers and sisters who have been imprisoned, right? Even though we might not be behind bars right now, and none of us are right at this moment, right? Our hearts, our spirits, our souls are, because there is no separation between us and them, right? And so they're doing work, they're living a life that is painful in a different way than we are, and we're still connected to that pain. And so we can't pretend like because we're out right now, we don't have to do that work. We have to do that work because we're tied to their freedom. As long as they're in prison, we're partially in prison, right? Our souls are in prison with them.
Yeah, and if I could just you know, I'm in agreement with Everything everybody said up here on the panel. And I do just want to address what Danny said. I used to think the same thing, like never in my lifetime. But, you know, I do think that we have to remember what we are looking at, the prison industrial complex, the unprecedented growth in the caging of human beings, right? And with California being ground zero for where the prison industrial complex started, that happened in the course of inside of about 25 years. We went from having about 12 prisons for about 153 years, San Quentin being the first, in 1883 until about 2003. We built almost 30 more, maybe 27, give or take, along with also building just one UC, right? And those are the same state monies. CDC, California Department of Corrections, University of California, that is state money. That was a decision by the people of California. That was a decision by politicians in relationship with developers, et cetera, to invest in the fatal unfreedom of people, to cage human beings in boxes, right? That happened, and it was happened, again, through a process, which means if it happened by choice, by decision, through certain kinds of processes that we can actually identify right now, that means it can be undone. Because if it can happen that quick, I believe it can be undone, because those were just processes, right? And all of those processes matter. To start convincing the public, and how do we go about, you know, talking to all different kinds of communities in different structures to invest in the production of life, right? Not the negation of life and the eradication of life, but the production of it to living. You know, how does that happen? In California, it happened in California for a reason, right? The prison building, and I believe it has to do with race, it has to do with economy, it has to do with land, territory, money. But I do believe it can be undone because it was done, and we can map it now how it happened. So I believe we can undo it, I think. So I'm going to move on to another question that we were talking about also at the table. I'm going to direct it towards Rick and Danny. The question is, how do we address the root causes of mass incarceration? And maybe we want to talk a little bit about what we think the root causes are, but how do we address them? Like, what do you think, if I just kind of said, if it happened and it was done and we can map it, is there a way that you guys think that we can undo it? Like, what might be the root causes? Number 8. That was, oh, you guys don't have the paper.
Yeah, I'll start it off. I believe that the first thing we have to do is we have to start with educating our people. Because what I found out, along with myself, is that I was totally illiterate till I was 28 years old. I was sitting in prison, and I found out that I had never had a desire to read. And I never knew that before. Before that, I thought that I was dumb and stupid, and that I couldn't be taught how to read or write. But it was only after I was sitting in prison and I found out that I needed to learn how to do the law in order for me to be able to win my freedom. Well, after I started looking at myself, I started looking at some of the other guys inside of prison, and I found out that a lot of them had the same problems with reading and writing and math. Most of them had even math problems. My problem wasn't math, but reading and writing. So I found out that 65% of the guys that was locked up with me couldn't read or write. And then even the ones who could read and write didn't really understand what they were reading and what they was writing. So I believe that the first step that we need to do is really start educating our people, because knowledge is power, and along with that, we'll be freeing ourselves. I found out once that I had learned how to read, I had become almost free in prison. I would get on the phone and I would talk to my people outside of prison, and I found out that they were incarcerated on the outside. You know, we have people right now here in LA that stay in the Jordan Down projects and Nicholson Gardens and the Imperial Courts who've never been to the beach. You know, they only go so far in the perimeter, and it's a gate, but it's invisible, that we put around ourselves. And I think that all that's a part of miseducation or lack of education. I'm not totally sure which one it is, but I do believe that everything starts with education, and I'm not just talking about normal book education, but just education about yourself. You know, if you don't know who you are or what you're capable of, then you can never reach your potential, because you'll never try to reach your potential. You know, you'll never expand yourself to the next level.
Yeah, it's very much similar like what the brother said, right, Ricky. Knowledge of self is important, right? If you don't know who you are and you don't know your past, then you know you're pretty much lost, right? And one of the first things of war, right, of colonization was burning our books, our histories, our traditions. You know, these things were being suppressed. You know, you couldn't practice your traditional indigenous practices that people, you know, were brought up with prior to the colonization, right? So really think about colonization played a very big role in taking away who we are, right? Our essence, right, as human beings, right? And we've been conditioned to think that, or at least in my case, right, I always thought of myself as less than nothing growing up, right? And I never liked school, right? School wasn't my thing. I got kicked out my first day of 10th grade. About 4 months later, I was looking at 75 years to life. Went in at 16, got out at 30. But when you talk about, for me, the root causes of mass incarceration are just a continuation of old systems, right? We're talking about the plantation, chattel slavery, the reservation, Native American indigenous genocide. You know, these are just systems that continue to exist in, through colonization, right? And to colonial settler through these colonial settler narratives. But also, again, talking about mass incarceration, I think for me was also not just, it wasn't about safety, it wasn't about taking bad people off the streets, it was really just about continuing to perpetuate a system that's going to disadvantage black people or people of color, right? Also, it was also a way to dismantle the movements of the 1960s, right? That were making a lot of progress, you know, towards liberation, right? So it was this whole thing about law and order, right? It was never about drugs. It was about law and order, and which is, you know, dog whistle politics for racism, right? And white supremacy. So I think, you know, really the thing about mass incarceration was really stopping the movement of what people were capable of what was going to come, right? You know, of being able to overturn the system. But you know, they're always thinking of ways to counter that, right? As much as we're going to organize, they're always going to be countering us, right? It's not like they're taking a day off and saying like, okay, you know what? Today, white supremacy is going to take a break. Like, no, it is actively working every day to continue to dismantle our communities.
I would love to add something to that. I found that question very intriguing for a couple of reasons. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that mass incarceration is constitutionally protected. Have any of you seen the brilliant film 13th by Ava DuVernay? Y'all seen it? If you haven't seen it, I highly encourage you to really go see it, because in order to understand abolishing systems, you have to understand what justifies the systems being there in the first place. The 13th Amendment, which is an amendment that's still currently on the books, justifies the captivity of millions of our fellow citizens. In the 13th Amendment, which was intended to, or so-called intended to eradicate slavery, actually reinvented slavery in the form of incarceration, because it explicitly states that those who have been duly convicted of a crime can be subjected to involuntary servitude. And when you look at our prison system and you look at the root causes of why they emerged in mostly impoverished communities, it was to exploit this free labor. You guys been following the fires in Northern Cal, right? Yeah. The frontline fighters right now are making $1 a day because they're incarcerated. And so they're up there being subjected to this very poor quality of air right now. They're doing a very dangerous job, putting their life at risk. And even though in the news they say that it's volunteer-based, even if they didn't volunteer, they would be made to go do it, because the 13th Amendment justifies involuntary servitude. What a lot of people don't think about is the fact that these same men and women who are fighting these fires can't come out and get a job as a firefighter. Right. So the hypocrisy that's justified by the 13th Amendment, as articulated in the film The 13th, would be the thing where we start the journey of unraveling how we got here in the first place. A lot of the corporations that we actually utilize, a lot of those places that we go to buy our food from, Whole Foods, they're exploiting free labor, but they won't turn around and hire people who have felonies. Victoria's Secret, who I was extremely disappointed to find out for personal reasons, they exploit cheap, free prison labor and then won't hire people. So anytime that you're trying to solve a problem, you have to really understand the history of how that problem emerged in the first place. And I think the film 13th did an amazing job at articulating that arc. And now it's up to us to take that information and begin to really challenge these corporations who are investing in it. When the current administration actually got inaugurated, the stock market went crazy with people investing in incarcerations because they knew that that's a big thing that they would be focused on, right? And so it's such a profit-driven institution. I'm currently the producer on a show called Release. Have you guys been watching that show, Saturday night on OWNs? So I'm a consulting producer on this show, and this is really the story of the families of men and women returning back to the community. One of the lead characters, I don't even say characters, one of the lead people who walked out of prison in California did 20 years for stealing $150 in baby clothes. Like, wrap your mind around that reality. 20 years, 2 decades, for stealing $150 worth of baby clothes. So we in a world where we value material possessions over humanity. That's a problem. And in order for us to really address that, we have to understand the profit motive as articulated by the 13th Amendment.
I think you bring up a really important point, and in my, my classes on race, prisons, and policing, I try to make this very clear to my students, and as an ethnic studies professor, oftentimes we learn the history of, let's say, Chicano people in the United States, right, and how, the land was stolen, things were, that like there was somehow this theft and something happened outside of law. And I try to, precisely because of what you're talking about, to tell them that the most horrendous racist violence that happens in this country, from Japanese internment to mass incarceration to the stealing of lands, did not happen outside of law, right? That was law that did it. Law did it. Like, there is an inherent violence in the idea and the practice of law that is always there. Like I tell my students, law does not function without violence. It cannot. I mean, it's a basic legal theory. Violence is inside of it. And so there's these kind of very liberal ideas that law is what's going to save us and protect us, that it provides order and safety and prevents chaos, et cetera. But somehow it fails over and over again, mostly on the backs of people of color and the poor, because of the inherent violence in law, and precisely because law, at least in the United States, will always end up having a violence, again, that oftentimes you can point to like 100 different types of, incidents where that violence lands on the backs of black and brown people and poor people and women and anybody on the margins. So it's very important, I think, to remember that. And I think that's a super important point to bring up, that it's in law. The laws of this country, the legal system of this country, has that inside of it. I have a question for Kim. So Kim, women are a growing population in prisons, not only throughout the state, but throughout the country. What do you think is the key to reducing or eliminating emerging issues of an increased female population in jails and prisons?
Well, I will take it back to the fact that people is money, with the prison system, like a big old Pac-Man. You got to eat people. So I've ate up all the men of color in the community that I could possibly get. The other ones are hiding out in colleges. I can't go in there and get them yet, wait for them to come out. So I'm going to get these wives and these women so I can go ahead and get these children and put these children in my other cousins. See, the prison industrial complex does not exist alone. So there's the child welfare system, there's the education system. They all kind of work together. So what happens is our kids wind up in another system, juvenile justice system, supposed to be getting some education while the mom and the dad maybe be in the criminal justice system, but all the time getting set to go to the juvenile justice system later on. Right? You come out, you go to the foster care system, and God forbid your mother try to come out of jail and get you back out of that system. No, you've already been tagged to go ahead into this bigger system because, see, we turn to numbers and barcodes. Whenever you have a product, you want that product to keep scaling and coming back in and out, swiping and scanning. So just think about at the grocery store when you buy groceries, you go swipe your things. So all these W numbers are numbers to get swiped. And they want to see a return on investment. Again, they spend billions, not millions, but billions of dollars into brick and mortar into these prisons. They still want that money back. All that for-profit prison system, they want a return on that dollar. So any of these laws that they create to try to further keep our people in and out of incarceration, to get our children, to get these school systems to continue to not educate our kids, so you have 3 out of 10 kids graduating. Why is the school still in the building? It shouldn't be called a school then, because you ain't even graduating kids. So where them other 7 kids going to? They ain't going to college, they ain't prepared. So they getting packaged up, pre-packaged up for this prison system. And at the 3rd grade, they already checking out test scores. They know the neighborhood, they know the family, that they know it's your uncle, your cousin, your mother, your brother, and they know your sister just had 2 kids. They watching, they know how to find you, they know where you're at, they know where your kin folks is at. And this is why I created this thing called the disease of incarceration. And so I don't have a PhD, but I got a PhD. So I was hanging out with these doctors, and I discovered that in order for a disease to exist, it must have 3 things: an environment, an agent, and a host. And in my environment was my community, where I was over-policed and underprotected, right? And then the agent, being the person that can't afford a lawyer, get a public pretender, going into the courthouse, taking the deal when I didn't even have no money to even get a real defense. So I'd rather get out of jail for free, but it ain't for free, because now I'm on parole or probation. I'm already on the hook to go back and forth, right? So then I go ahead and have this thing called a beautiful, pretty daughter, right? Being a single mom, and my mind says, well, I can't live off of food stamps, because you can't get enough on welfare, because if you get a 5-cent raise, you might lose your child care. So your mind say, you better do something different, because the environment didn't offer me all these big old jobs and stuff. It offered me another way out of a hustle, because I was doing a little bit of math myself, brother, but I just happened to start using my product, so that didn't last too long, and I was supposed to get some substance abuse and treatment, but I wound up getting prison instead. You understand what I'm saying? And so, that type of cycle goes on. And so if I think about my sisters, that's why I started Time for Change Foundation, because when I got out of prison, I couldn't come back to Los Angeles. I had to go way to the Inland Empire in order to change. See, I wanted to change, but I needed a place to change at. Where could I go where I didn't have a demand on me, like pay the rent, get a job? I couldn't get a job because folks wasn't hiring, because there was this thing that you guys knew about that I didn't know about, called discrimination. See, at first I thought that something was wrong with me and I was a bad person. I realized I was a sick person and I was misunderstood, and that I was not miseducated. I had never been educated. But I learned from the streets with my common sense and my street sense what was really going on. So I woke up to the fact that while I was in prison on drugs, there was a whole world out here sitting by, getting real smart and getting a whole bunch of athletes behind their names, but not doing enough with it to save a person like me. So I had to come out and be the leader for my cause, to help my sisters, because I could not sit back and relax and wait for someone else to do what needs to be done. See, I was the one that stood with the flag, and we march in front of the housing authority, and we go down here and we protest the prison, we do that. I decided that I need the biggest change I wanted to see, so I became a certified nonprofit affordable housing developer. Build my own buildings. The Lord told me, possess the land and build your buildings. Right? So When I go from not being able to get a job to being the president and CEO because I can. And if I can, my sister coming out of prison, she can too. We was never a dumb lot. We just didn't have money for a lawyer. We just didn't have money for a lawyer. 'Cause I can tell you right now, you guys watch it every day. You see Lindsay Lohan and Paris Hilton. They go to that same jail in Lawndale. Knock, knock. Who's there? It's Paris. Oh, Paris, we full right now. You can't come in. They don't never let one of the other folks already in there get out. They just let them turn around. I wish I could have turned around. I ain't never met a jail too full yet to take me in. Every time I went to jail, they had a bed for me, a hallway for me, a closet for me, a blanket for me, and my sisters in the community. So I know when you got access to power, when class and race intersect, that I know that thing called the law, it don't act right when it looks at me. I know she may be blindfolded on the statue, but for real, she see real good. Because she see the brown, she see the black, she see the poor, and she see the underserved. And somehow we get that sword that she has on her hip, that lady of justice, and she cuts down our family, and she cuts down our community, and she cuts down our school. And you tell me to do not kneel for the national anthem? What anthem? What anthem? How can I feel something about an anthem when it's not true for me? So I say when we sit in these classrooms right here, get your education, but come out here and make it do something good for the community, because it's a cold twist out here.
I don't know how to even follow up with that. Like, what do I do with that right there? I like. Yeah. Wow. You know, we did talk a little bit. I know I'm just trying to catch my breath on that one. Thank you. That felt good. Thank you. We did talk a little bit in the back too, and I wanted to bring this up. And maybe Melina, I know Rick wanted to talk about this, Danny, that wasn't kind of on the agenda, or at least doesn't get talked about, is policing, right? And I do believe, you know, in this age of what, you know, mass incarceration, and sometimes I translate to, because I look at that in relationship to things like, you know, as a huge security apparatus. When I talked earlier about telling my students, how did the public come to invest so much in the fatal unfreedom of whole populations of people, right? That's an investment that California made. We have made this investment as a country, not only here inside the U.S., but, you know, outside the U.S. in forms of war, right? The war apparatus. I do some work at looking at the relationship between soldiering and international war laws, and the way in which police on the streets, especially in the police on the streets of Los Angeles, as Los Angeles is, you know, and at least the sheriff's department is quite proud of it, has the largest local jail on the planet. There is no other jail as big as Los Angeles County anywhere else in the world, right? Which requires, first and foremost, a huge policing apparatus. You don't end up in jail without being policed, right? And so, and policing has its own type of, presumably, laws that regulate it, right? But we can see now more than ever in the excess, again, of human sacrifice, how the idea of law and regulation does not work. You know, race far precedes, and racial violence precedes what happens, you know. So I was wondering if anybody wants to talk a little bit about, I mean, I call myself a prison abolitionist, but I'm also a policing abolitionist too. If anybody has some stuff to say about the cops.
I can speak on my my background with the police. We moved out in LA when I was about 4 years old, and it was about a year before the Watts riot. And I can remember the Watts riot when my older brother, who didn't move out with me and my mom when we moved out to LA, he came out about a year and a half later, and he had joined a group called US, and they were marching, protesting police brutality, as I remember. And I can remember one day my brother coming in, and his nose was broken and his mouth was bleeding, and he was saying that the police had did it to him, and he hadn't did anything. And I really didn't know, you know, because when I was growing up, I thought about being a police. You know, it was one of my dreams to be a police officer. But as I got older and I started to have more interactions with the police, I started to have a distaste for the police myself, because they would pull me over, or me and my friends over. I got my driver's license at 16 years old, and I did the driving for my crew, as we call it. But we wasn't bad dudes at that time. I mean, our main thing was playing football, tennis, trying to take girls out, but no criminal activity. But the cops would still pull us over, make us all get out of the car, lay on the ground, sit on the curb, handcuff you sometime, put you in the back of the car, just all type of mistreatment that eventually gave us a distaste for the police. And really right now, as I look back at it, I should dislike the police even more so than I do right now, because I do believe that there are some good cops out there. You know, I just haven't saw him yet. But I was handcuffed, hog-tied by my feet, and as soon as I was handcuffed and hog-tied, they sicked the dog on me. They started kicking me with their boots. I had boot marks all over my chest, my head. I was hitting their face with steel flashlights. I had to get stitches in my head, front and back. I had to have staples in my legs from dog bites. And they did this for no apparent reason, because I was a major drug dealer. I sold drugs. I never denied that I sold drugs. But in my jacket, I have absolutely no violence. I've never had any violence in my jacket. It was times that I would carry a gun, but I carried a gun for protection, not to harm anybody. I ran around the city with a lot of money. You know, it was days that I could be walking around with $3 million in a duffel bag, and I felt that I needed to protect that. But I had cops to come to court, get on the witness stand, swear and take the oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and lie like a dog. You know, say that they saw me stash drugs, they followed me in a house that I'd never been in. It just went on and on about the way cops police, and I believe that if we had more honest cops, then the criminal justice system would definitely be looked at different. I've been in a courtroom where you had to pick a jury. I can remember my first trial, and we go to court, and my lawyer says, Your Honor, if you look at the defendants, you have 4 black defendants, and all the jurors are white. All the judges are white. All the judge is white. All the lawyers are white. The clerk is white. So we're sitting inside of a courtroom, 4 black men, basically with an all-white judging panel. And it just goes on and on. I mean, we saw cases where a black, a white, and Hispanic all have identical cases with identical backgrounds, and the white guy wound up getting off. When we first started studying about crack cocaine, the first guy that we knew was a guy, he was 19 years old when he got arrested. He eventually got a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Well, we wanted to find out what happened to white guys that got caught with crack. Well, we did a lot of research, a lot of studying. We finally found 2 people, and they both was turned away from the feds and sent over to the state, where they both eventually got a drug diversion. So when you start to see the law working in this form, then you start to question the whole system. You know, like, what is this system? Is this out to have justice or just us?
My first encounter with the police was when I was 8 years old. Me, my brother, and this is my first encounter, and my last encounter was with the same person who I had my first encounter, right? It was me, my brother, and a friend. And my friend's one of the guys that I went to prison with in '96. But around 1988, I remember me, my friend, and my brother were walking on the other side of town, which is, you know, a little nicer than where I live at. I'm from Norwalk, from the one-way streets. We're on the other side of town, and we had spray cans on us. We had 3 spray cans, and walking home, tons of, we're gonna go spray paint our bikes and fix them up. We're all into lowrider bikes at that time, right? And we get pulled over by a cop. We're about to jump the gate into the high school and kind of walk across the high school, and we get pulled over by the cop, and he starts asking us, where'd you guys get these spray cans? Because you guys stole them from Home Depot, because the spray cans had a Home Depot tag. And we told him, nah, we didn't steal them, we kept saying, we didn't steal them. So he takes us to Home Depot. He asks the people at Home Depot, did they steal these cans? And they said, like, no, nobody stole these, right? And so then the police officer told us, I'm still gonna take you into custody just so that I can prepare you for your future. And the interesting thing was that me and my brother, none of my family has been incarcerated, but my friend, his mom, his dad, his uncles, have all been in and out of the system, right? So, and it was interesting. So, I got picked up. My mom, picked us up, and we got home, and we got our ass beat, right? Me and my brother. And but then for me, I was trying to explain to my mom, like, Mom, I didn't do nothing. But my mom's, just recently arrived from Mexico, and to her, anybody that is wearing a uniform, or whether it's a police officer or a doctor, somebody in authority, they're gonna believe them before they believe their own child, right? So for her, we're like, no, a police officer would never lie or make something up like that, right? So that for me was even not just criminalizing through the state, but also convincing my mom to criminalize me as well, right? So then another encounter that I had, well, I had a few encounters with the police, right? And but that was that one encounter where, like, I started realizing, like, oh, they're not as good as I thought they were, or at least the way I've been told they were, right? And then it's in high school, 1992, I was already in a class where they were putting kids that were kind of falling behind, and one of the teachers brought in a guy who had just got out of prison. And he says, this guy, he just got out of prison, and he's introduces himself, tells us where he's from West Side Long Beach, and he asks the class, like, I just got out of prison, and he asked, a bunch of the youngsters there, he goes, what's the biggest gang in LA? And we all thought we knew the answer. Oh, 18th Street, MS-13, Florencia, East Coast Crib. Like, we just started throwing out all these hoods. And he's just laughing. Goes, nah, the LA County Sheriffs. That's the biggest gang in LA. The LAPD, that's the biggest gang in LA. And that's when I started thinking about, my perception of police was, the way that they operate, When I was in juvenile hall, in prison, you hear stories from different people. You're like, I remember the cop picked me up over here in MacArthur Park, and they took me to the side of Pico Union, and they just dropped me off, and they told all the dudes, hey, he's from the other side of town. Bye. And they leave dude right there, And, so they perpetuate the violence in the neighborhood. One time in my committee, we tried to start a peace treaty in 1993. We tried to start a peace treaty where we said no more gang violence between all Raza communities, right? And that didn't last long. That didn't last long because same thing that happens with the Bloods and the Crips. That was interference by police officers who were still engaging in gang violence and playing it off with the other community. You know what I mean? So things, so they do perpetuate the violence in our community because it's their business. If we were to sit here and organize and call a truce between all hoods in LA County and there was no more violence, there'd be no need for the police.
Right, bad for
Which
business.
there really is no need for the police anyways.
Bad for business. Now, I do want, okay, no, go ahead, Melina, yeah, go.
So I don't want to speak too much because I think both of you really illustrated how, like, the abuse and the occupation of our communities by the police is normal, right? It's become normalized. We have been trained and conditioned to accept it. I have my own experiences growing up in East Oakland, right? We actually, the way that and I think in black communities it's a little different. I don't think anybody who I know thought that the police were good, like ever. Like I was never raised to believe that the police were good. That said, I think that we were raised, or at least my generation was raised, to try to survive interactions with the police through a tactic of submission, right? So just do what they say, right? Just try to get home, right? And so I can't even count the number of times that, we had to submit to things that I don't even know if we knew how wrong they were, right? but they were so wrong. Like in the 90s, just the frequency of your steps, right? You knew as a woman, or I was a girl then, right? If you were out on a date with a dude, because the targeting usually happened of the guys, right? That you were gonna get pulled over if he had a nice car. You were just going to, and you just hoped that the process went quickly and that the police didn't grope you too much, right? So you knew that these things were happening, right? And I think that's the attitude that we grew up with. That normalization, though, I think, and you were speaking to this, Shaka, like the roots of imprisonment, right, are also tied to the roots of policing, right? So what we've seen is just an evolution of the system of chattel slavery in both systems, right, where prisons are evolved plantations and then police are evolved patty rollers, right? And many of you know this history, that, you know, the history of policing in this country is that police directly evolve from patty rollers who literally saw targets on backs of black people who dared to run away from their plantations, right? They are still treating us that way, right? They are still treating us with targets on our backs, because once they get us and capture us, just like the patty rollers of chattel slavery, then they use us to fill these prisons that they make profit from, right? And they exploit us in many different ways, as workers, as units of, to be traded and sold, right? And as consumers. I mean, we didn't even get into what happens in prisons and the whole economy of prisons. Everybody in here has put money on somebody's books, right? That whole economy. Everybody in here has a global Tel-Link on their phone, right? So that whole economy, and that is an evolved system of chattel slavery, with the police being the new evolution of the patty rollers. And so just to speak about what it means in terms of police violence and the killing of black people, one of the things that we can think about is the era, the height of lynching. Many people think that the height of lynching happened during chattel slavery, but it didn't, right? It happened after chattel slavery. Why? Because people didn't want to kill their own property, right? The property was useful, right? When we think about what's happening now, right, our bodies are disposable, right? So this surge, people say it's because of social media, we just know about people being killed by police more. No, people are actually being killed more. The Dignity and Power Now has a statistic that the number of people who are being killed by police now is more than triple what it was at the height of the lynching era, right? So when you have people who are seen with targets on their backs, who are not yet owned by the new plantations, the prisons, right? They're disposable, right? And they're also making examples of us, telling us, get back in your place, Trayvon, right? Get back in your place, Riddell, right? Get back in your place, Nephi, because you are bucking a system that's meant to imprison and enslave you. And so I think it's important that we understand how all of these things, police violence, criminalization, and incarceration, are all linked and interdependent.
You know, and I'd like to add to that, just, you know, in a way to start, I think, you know, I've been, to start thinking about, like, how do we deal with, you know, again, maybe the dismantlement of policing, but definitely being able to put a handle on this police violence now that is not new. By any stretch of the imagination, it's not new. But now that we can see it in ways that we didn't, although we could see it in those years, especially those hot years, man, those early 90s, you know, we have been seeing it. The television show Cops is a perfect example. This isn't new. I mean, the television show Cops, you see people being shot, and this was entertainment in 1989. You know, I do think, though, like, you know, some folks say, well, the idea of the war on drugs and the war on crime and using that word war is kind of hyperbolic. But, you know, in this work that I've been doing about, like, international war laws and the ways that soldiers function on the ground in other countries, right? The ability for soldiers to go in and pick up, you know, people that they deem threat to the U.S., right? Can pick them up and hold them, right? Well, jails are holding centers, right? You are not a convicted criminal while you are in jail. You are being held. You are held until you are proven. So a lot of folks, like in prison studies, they conflate jail and prisons, and they are not the same things. You are in jail until you are proven to be a criminal. There are people, my own brother who's done time in jail, waiting trial or going through trial, 2 years in LA County Jail, right? And as I kind of looked at the way that these like international war laws worked, and the way that soldiers can, with impunity and under law, pick up people and hold them, when you look at the way in which police, especially in Los Angeles, police that city, again, to result in the largest jail on the planet, they function as soldiers do. The ability for them to pick up and hold and detain, the ability to kill people, and true, it appears that there has to be this way of like going about and they need to be held accountable, but they are almost never held accountable for the homicides committed.
They are never held accountable. So in less than 5 years, 300 people have been killed by police in LA County. Not a single officer has even been charged in those killings.
I know.
So they're never held accountable.
Right. In LA, for sure, never, ever, right? And so that is like a homicide, and it functions, again, the way that soldiers can kill. When you look through international war laws, police function as soldiers. So there is the ways in which it's not hyperbolic. It is war. And we see it historically, not just in the South in terms of like the slave patrols and the patrolling of slaves, although it is these origins, right? But when you look at the kind of occupation and the settlement of the war, like U.S. war with Mexico, or the taking of land west of the Mississippi from Native folks, the earliest police, the modern policing system called the Texas Rangers, first functioned, and their history says they functioned first as soldiers, right, when the kind of colonial process of taking Texas and kind of dealing with settlement. But after the U.S.-Mexico war, they write about this, they call themselves, they start becoming police. And it's like, not only now do they have to deal with threats to the nation, meaning Mexicans as non-US citizens, and Native Americans as having their own sovereignty rights, which look like direct threats to the country as a national threat. Then they start turning into what they call themselves police, because then they're going after like cattle robbers and train robbers and, in the West calling criminals. But yet the criminals were always the same. They were always then, at that point in the West, Mexican and Native Americans. Meaning
people of color.
Meaning that we have always worked in that process of conflating the two. Threat to the nation, criminal. Like criminals, but police are just supposed to be handling like crimes and criminal behavior, investigation, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not the way that the violence happens on the streets. So it isn't just hyperbolic to call it war. It is, and you can trace it in policy, how the police really do function as, and the only safety net they have is this idea that they're dealing with crime and criminal behavior.
You know what, I like your perspective on that, because when you break it down, it's back to what's happening in the hood, right? We're still over-policed and underprotected. I want to give a shout out right now. I want to give a shout out to YJC. Youth Justice Coalition, stand up in the back. Ray, stand up, YJC. Because, this is the youth who do not want to wind up 40, 50 years old in the penitentiary. You know what I'm saying? I want to give a shout out to Time for Change Foundation. Stand up for coming out and decide that you're not going to recycle and go back in. I want to give a shout out to my boy Nate Williams over here. Stand up, Nate. Got his organization up in the Heights in the Oakland area. I want to give a shout out to Froggy in the back, original YJC member that's here holding it down. Because it's when you come back to the community and you put your 2 feet on the ground and you decide to make a difference. It's like Karen Daniels, who's been holding her husband down in the penitentiary since the first day I met her, and doing great things to bring fathers and children together so we can start getting a stigma removed from these kids not knowing who their mother and father was. So I want to give a shout out to Karen McDonough right here. Put your hand, Karen. She been doing some real work. And see, I just appreciate those of us that's in the trenches, right? I wish I had time, and one day I probably will, really try to go back, because I know that I am a descendant of some big people who were so strong they made through the Middle Passage. I know something about this pretty brown skin frightens white folks for whatever reason. Before I even open up my mouth, there's always a game plan try to put us in jail. Something about this brown texture, this cocoa butter, this love, you know, about the black man, that somehow is something against him and you want to see him disappear, because we don't look good unless we catering to you or we being your maids or your butlers. But guess what? We can read now. You see what I'm saying? And we going to school now. And we can do some things around here, and we create our own company. So, you know, when we look at the larger system and what we're going to do about it, we got to just take a piece of this world and change it. And if everybody just take a piece, everybody just take a piece and change it, it's got to make a difference, because I don't know how to go back and reverse the Christopher Columbus calling his ass discovering America. Right. I don't really know how to undo that process. So until somebody figure that out, take a piece of America and change it. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else have some closing statements, because we're going to have to start winding things down, or anything else anybody want to say?
My closing statement is, my closing statement is Saturday night, every Saturday for the next 7 weeks, no, actually the next 6 weeks, check out Released. It is the story of families grappling with their loved ones coming home. It is our story. It affects and impacts community. We haven't been honest about a lot of stuff, you know, when it comes to what our role is. So, you know, panels are always interesting to me. Largely because I feel like a lot of times we're preaching to the choir. Most of us do this work. I'm a solution-oriented person. Like, we can talk about our problems till the cows come home. We can assess them, we can analyze them, we can intellectualize them, and all these other things. Sadly, we don't monetize them, which we need to start doing. So I just want to say that I'm thinking about solutions. How do we solve problems? You know, I walked out of prison June 22nd, 2010. On my way out the door, here's what happened. They gave me this bag, and it contained my medical records. It contained a piece of paper we had to sign saying that we wouldn't carry a firearm, and 3 condoms. Why 3? I have no idea. Appreciated those. Good looking out. Get the brother prepared. But on the way out the door, they said, "We'll see you back in 6 months." And initially, I was offended by that. Because in my mind, I'm like, how dare you, on my most important day, dim the light of that day by saying that you'll see me back in 6 months. But then I thought about it. We have a 70% recidivism rate. Rick just spoke about it. The average person we were incarcerated with had 3rd grade reading levels, 3rd grade math levels. There's no way you can come out here in a justice society without being prepared. That's our responsibility. We can't wait on the system to fix what we're personally responsible for. The conditions of the schools in our community, that's our responsibility. Education starts in the household. I have a 5-year-old that I can actually probably sit on this panel right now and he can interview everybody up here. Not because of what the educational system did, but because of what we do as parents. It's my responsibility to ensure that he's educated, that he's informed, that he's prepared to build. So when I walked out and they said that I would be back in 6 months, what actually happened is the first year, I won an award for my work mentoring in my community. Following year, I had a fellowship at MIT Media Lab. I followed that up with a fellowship at Kellogg. I began to teach at the University of Michigan with no PhD, no master's degree, no bachelor's degree, no associate's degree, just a GED and flat kicks, because I always had to make sure I wore flat kicks. 2014, I spoke at TED's 30th year anniversary. We had one of the top talks of that year. 2015, Manchester University Innovator of the Year Award. 2016, my book debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. I won an NAACP award, the forward, and so I can go on and on. And the reality is the only way I was able to do that is because I had amazing mentors who are serving life in prison right now, who are dying in prison right now, because we're not taking the time and the opportunity to invest in the people in our community, to invest in the men and women coming home, to actually allow them to actualize their dream in a real way. When I walked out of prison, one of the things that absolutely disgusted me is that the prison I walked out of was in better condition than the first school that I walked into. That's our responsibility. Like that's on our shoulders. The levels of gun violence we see in our community, that's our responsibility. The reason me and Rick do this work, because we know what we did during the crack era. We know the impact that our lifestyle had on our community. And so we do this work oftentimes with no pay, oftentimes with no sense of support, other than just the guys inside saying, you know what, y'all got to get out there and y'all got to make a way. So it's great that we're working to dismantle the system, but in the process of doing that, what are we doing for the lives that have been destroyed? What are we doing for the lives that are being left out? What are we doing for the young brothers and sisters we walk past every day? Literally, walk past them, right? We probably walked in this building and walked past a few people who probably could have just benefited from somebody stopping and saying, hey, how you doing? How was your day today? And so to me, as we leave this panel, the reason I'm telling you to watch this show, it's not just because, you know, it's a show that I did, it's because what we see is the collateral consequences and impact that incarceration not only has on a person who was formerly incarcerated, but the impact that it has on families that are being destroyed because their fathers and mothers are being locked away for stealing $150 worth of baby clothes. That's all I got to say. Salute, y'all.
I want to say a few things in closing. One of the things I've noticed is the prejudice from being not only a black man, because I recognized prejudice when I was coming up as a black man, but now as a convicted felon, and then when you put on top of that drug kingpin, it takes it to a whole nother level. When I was in prison, I had did some soul searching with myself. And I don't know if you know, but my story, I started in the drug business with $125 at 19 years old, had never saw drugs before, was an aspiring tennis player, had scholarship opportunities, but I couldn't read or write. Before I got arrested, I had made up to $3 million in one day. Well, while I was in prison, I thought about that. What kind of skill set did it take for somebody to be able to take $125 and turn it into $3 million a day? And what I did is I took the drugs out of it, and I said, what if I would have been doing something else? How would society have treated me if it wasn't drugs? Right now, when I go out and I try to talk to our young people about drugs, our system don't want me to talk to them. They don't want to let me around them. While I was there, I wrote a book. I'm an author too. I'm self-published author right now. Been a bestseller on Amazon and a few other websites. But I wrote this book because I thought that our young people should know exactly what they were going to get into if they started selling drugs. I tried to document as much as I remember about the people that was using drugs, the people that sold drugs, the people that talked me into getting involved in the drug business, because a lot of people, they want to blame me for our drug problem. But I say, well, if you want to blame me for everybody's drug problem, then the guy who taught me how to sell drugs have to take the responsibility for all of my problems. Because he showed me what I was doing when I didn't know nothing about it. So there's so many prejudice related to this criminal justice system, and once you get that F on you, it just takes it to a whole nother level. And I believe that us as a society, once we become more educated about the system, because if you look at the hypocriteness with this system, if you turn on the radio any given morning, you will hear them teaching our kids that they should be selling drugs. I've been in high schools at basketball games, and they're playing trap music to our kids, and every kid in there is jumping up and down and they're partying. Matter of fact, I was just at a college homecoming last night, and they had Jeezy and 2 Chainz live and in effect. And if you know anything about their music, is they talking about trap music. They talking about selling drugs and committing crime. So when you brainwash your children into believing that this is their way out of the ghetto, and then you turn around and you want to punish them because they get involved with exactly what you're saying, and then when you look at these corporations, the record labels, they invested in the prison system. So you definitely have to take a closer look and question this whole system. Thank you.
For me, when I was in solitary confinement, I didn't even have my GED, right? This is 2005, and people around me were encouraging me, yo, Danny, you know, you got 5 years to the house, what are you gonna do? You know, and my thing was like, I just don't wanna come back to prison. And the response was, well, if you don't create a plan, you're gonna come back, right? So I had to start thinking, yo, like, and that was like the first time that anybody ever really, you know, took the time to really be like a mentor or something, right? And I really started focusing on my education, right? And but I was already doing all kinds of reading. You know, I would read Eduardo Galeano, the Zapatista reader, all about, you know, I was reading a lot of history, just things, you know, sociology books, things like that, right? But I didn't really think about going back to school, like to get a degree or anything like that. But once I started, got my GED, and I started doing the college courses, and people were encouraging me to, you know, continue to pursue my education. I really made education my re-entry tool, right? When I came home, right? I decided to continue to pursue my education. And I seen it as an opportunity to be able to, for me, education was my AA degree, my bachelor's degree, are indicators or somehow to overcome my, you know, my conviction history, right? You know, going in at 14 years old, 16 years old, not having no kind of work history, you know, but at the same time, I seen, you know, education was very empowering, right? It politicized me. It gave me a sense of identity, and it gave me context, right? About how you know, at a very young age, I used to think like, I am the way I am because that's just the way it is, you know? Like, I am a bad person. I'm a gangbanger. I'm gonna kill somebody that looks just like me because he lives 5 blocks away from me on another neighborhood, you know? And that was the get down, right? And we never really thought about, you know, we didn't know about these systems, right? We just thought, you know, we were bad people because we've been conditioned to believe that. But education allowed me to understand that, you know, it's much more than that, right? I understand that I have responsibility that I have to be accountable to my community for the things that I've done to my community, for people that I've hurt. But at the same time, I was operating from a place of ignorance, right? But now education has empowered me to understand that I can be a tool for empowerment for my community, right? And for me, education has given me that, right? And that's why I try my best to encourage formerly incarcerated people and system impacted people to pursue education, to use that as an opportunity to empower themselves, and not necessarily just think about what the money that they're gonna make, but the impact that it has on your family and your community, right? When I came home, my little brother was 16 years old, and he had started writing to me like around 13 and telling me like, yo, brother, when you come home, we're gonna, you know, it's on. We're gonna, you know, push some dope. We're gonna do what we gotta do. And I would tell him like, nah, man, we ain't doing that. And for like 3 years, I would tell him like, no, we ain't doing that. We ain't doing that. And when I came home and he seen that I changed, he didn't really want to talk to me because I wasn't the person that everybody used to tell him I was, right? Like, oh, your brother's in solitary confinement. He a rider, he a banger, you know, he does all that, you know. And he thought that's who I was when I was coming home, and I totally changed, right? And then, well, anyways, a couple years later, my little brother gets busted. At this time, I'm already at UC Berkeley, right? And he's looking at 5 years for a gun possession. First day of court, they tell him, take 5 years and we're done. And like my family, like, nah, hell no, we're gonna bail him out. We got him a lawyer. They weren't expecting that, right? The system wasn't expecting us to bail him out, to get him a lawyer, to move him up to Berkeley. I moved him up to Whitney, and next thing you know, through encouragement and through modeling, he decides to get his high school diploma as adult school, goes into community college, and now is in the process of applying to transfer, right? So really, for me, education does have an impact, not just on me, but on a larger scale, right? And I think that's something that we're trying to model with the work that we do with underground scholars, right? Thank you.
All right, if we can just get...
I have one more thing.
Oh, go ahead. Okay.
So just as we close out, I wanted to uplift, I made a statement that I kind of want to correct a little bit when I said that about not going to jail on protest stuff. I want to be honest, that going to jail on protest stuff is still really important, right? And we have to remember that there are people in there, I want to uplift the name Sundiata Acoli, who is 80 years old and still in prison, right? So he was one of the comrades of Assata Shakur. I want us to uplift him because he's been denied parole, and the people who have put their lives on the lines and decided, I will sacrifice my life, I will live behind these bars for the freedom of my people, we can't forget about them, right? So I got a text from Sekou Odinga. I was sharing with your son another Sekou, right? So I got a text while we were up here from Sekou Odinga encouraging us to rally for Sundiata Acoli and give out this website, www.safc.com, www.s as in Sam, F as in Frank, C.com, so that we can push for his freedom. We have to push for the liberation of our people, especially those whose fight is for our liberation. So I want to uplift his name. I also wanted to say that we're talking about what mass incarceration looks like, what mass criminalization looks like, and we're, I think, doing a good job of talking about what these systems do to us. And I think we have to remember that every time we fight for our freedom, we win it, right? So there are these huge structures that are designed to make us think that we have to submit to them, but we don't. We don't have to submit to this, right? Our ancestors, you talked about our ancestors like speaking through us. Our ancestors are demanding that we rise up, and we say, no, we ain't submitting to this, right? We're not. We will win when we fight. When we fight, we win. And so when you talk about the largest jail system in the world, right? Yeah, and they're talking about spending another $3.5 billion on new jails in LA County. Right? What does that take away from our community when they're spending on jails that they intend to fill with people who look like us? Right? So fight this, fight the jail expansion, and say, if you're gonna lock people up, the first people we want you to lock up is the police who kill our people. Lock them up, right? So we want you to sign a petition to prosecute killer cops at bit.ly/ in all caps BLMLA, and we want you to be part of the Justice LA Coalition. On October 23rd, there's going to be a meeting in the Antelope Valley so we can push back against this $3.5 billion additional dollars, and these are the straight up funds, not the additional $3.5 billion that they're going to also use. Youth Justice Coalition can give you more information. So the county funds are $3.5 billion, then they're gonna privately contract probably another $3.5 billion out. $7 billion in total. Do y'all want that? No. Do y'all want that? No. So if you don't want it, fight it, right? When we fight, we win. When we fight, we win. Don't forget that, so keep up the fight.
On that note, can we just get a stand and give an applaud to our panelists?
Can we give it up for Dr. Ofelia Cuevas, please, for moderating the conversation? And one more time, Danny Murillo, Melina Abdullah, Shaka Senghor, Kim Carter, the real Rick Ross. My name is Laurel Butler. I'm on faculty here at UCLA with the Visual and Performing Arts Education program. and the prison education program. As someone who's in this space and is not formally incarcerated like so many other folks in the room, I want to say that to be in a space of listening and learning is from the folks who have been directly impacted by the systems that we're trying to dismantle is an honor and a privilege. And so give it up for them one more time. I know we've really shown a lot of love, but this is a heavy-hitting group of folks in the room. I, along with Professor Breon Bain, am also honored to be one of the faculty advisors of the Justice Work Group, and we've been working diligently to create this conference for you all this weekend. So I want to just invite a moment to take a look around at the other people who are in the room. Like, actually, I really want you to do this. I want you to make eye contact with somebody around you, maybe somebody that you don't know, and smile at them and witness the fact that they chose to show up here today, and that they're choosing to show up this weekend, and that we're here in this space together because we know that mass incarceration affects all of us. And we're all coming to the table right now at this moment and in this movement, and we're gonna spend the weekend together. Shaka just said, I'm thinking about solutions. And Kim just said, everybody just take a piece and change it. And that is what Beyond the Bars LA, the end of mass incarceration, is all about. Together, we all take a piece and we work to transform it into justice. Because do we love justice? Thank you. So let me tell you, if we're gonna be in space together, we have to break bread together. We have to be in community together. So there's a lot of ways that that's gonna happen over the course of the next few days. Right now, on the terrace behind us, we're gonna have a reception. I recommend that as you head out there in a moment, you travel through the promenades on either side of the ballroom. There's art installed in there by the Liberated Arts Collective, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, the Prison Arts Collective. It's beautiful and extraordinary. Head back out to the terrace where we're gonna have